Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I'm always gratified when we have return guests who come to visit us. And Dave, I know you feel the same way.
Mhm.
And today we have Donna Seebo, who's been on our program before. And we could talk a lot about a bunch of different things with Donna, but one thing that she suggested and kind of intrigues me is remote viewing, of which she's had some experience. So, Donna, welcome to our show.
Well, thank you so much for having me back again.
Sure, we enjoy that. So let's talk about remote viewing. Should we go down that rabbit hole for a bit?
Well, I don't think it's a rabbit hole, but we can go
Okay, yeah,
on.
yeah. Maybe that's not a very good way to characterize remote viewing. So you define remote viewing. What's your definition of remote viewing?
Being able to perceive information consciously about a situation, a person at a distance. And remote viewing has been in so many arenas, really a fascinating topic. But it's something that actually many times people are doing without realizing it. And I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman that I knew. His name was Eric. And Eric was a very interesting person. This was a man of mature years, very professional. And when he found out the work that I did as a psychic, as a counselor, etc., he said, I'm going to share a story with you. He said, it happened to me when I was driving down the freeway. He said, my son is a pilot and he was in air flying, and I was going to meet him at, I think it was the Gig Harbor Airport, which is a community that's very close to Tacoma. So I said, oh, okay. And he said, this is what happened. I am driving and I'm thinking about my son, and there is a movie that is playing right in front of my eyes. And in that movie, I see my son, and my son is planning on landing the plane at the airport. And he said he's in trouble. Now, this bothered him so much when he was actually experiencing it. And that is a form of remote viewing. And that remote viewing ended up being something that he found later because the movie stopped just before his son landed in the mind, the movie in the mind. And what occurred then, which was very, very interesting, is that by the time he got to the airport, and he had pulled off of the freeway when he was driving because this upset him so much. When he finally got to the airport, he found his son was waiting for him. And he shared with his son the movie that he saw in his mind. And he said it was so real. I could feel everything, I could smell everything, the smell of the engine, the interior of the plane. And he said, I saw you. And then what occurred is all of a sudden it stopped. And his son, Dad, said to him, Dad, you were seeing me in actual time. And he said, I was having problems with the plane, but I was able to get some advice from the tower. And then consequently, I was able to land the plane safely. And Bud said many people, if they would hear that story, would feel as if there was something really strange going on. Well, to me, that's a form of remote viewing in real time. It's not unlike what the CIA and the Russians and the Israelis and a number of the groups that were working globally back in the 60s and the 70s, trying to develop remote viewing for the purposes of national security or whatever security they deemed it was for. And this is a discipline. Now, with Eric, it was something that was in that particular moment. But the people that were under the training of Russell Targ and some other individuals, and Russell is now in his 80s, I believe, and he's legally blind, but he still rides a road motorcycle. But he goes into detail whenever he has a chance to speak. Then he goes into a great deal of detail about how the training was done. And you had Inger Swan that worked in this. There is a gentleman, and I have the book here, Joseph McMoneagle, and this is the book. They called him a psychic spy. Well, that was remote viewing. But this was something that was done deliberately and it was done consciously. And it is something that people often do without realizing it. In everyday life, it can happen like it did with Eric. Or, for example, many times when I'm doing readings with people, they'll ask about someone that maybe is in another country or is in a location that's thousands of miles away from where we are having the conversation. And then we find that there's information. There is a form of remote viewing where you're picking up on people, situations, environments that you have no knowledge about, but you're getting the transmission. Many times telepathy is very much like remote viewing. I think the two terms can be interchanged, and there may be some people that would disagree with me on that, but there is that awareness that you can have that enables you to pick up on people in different situations. And it really is something that law enforcement, there have been law enforcement officers that have used it. They didn't know exactly how they classify it at that time, but it was something they'd see things happening and they go, all right, something's going on. Well, their orientation is to prevent crime. And so they want to protect the citizens. So they respond to this. They learn how to pay attention to it. It's really quite a fascinating subject.
Well, yeah, that's my sense of it.
I've
Dave,
got
go
a
ahead.
yeah, I've got a question. I have to jump in here, Donna, because I've never heard this addressed in relation to remote viewing. I know there's a a scale by which scientists measure visual ability, acuity, maybe. In other words, the ability of different individuals to picture things, in their mentally in their mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what the scale is called. I'm sure there's some name named after some scientist, but some of us have very poor visualization skills. Like if you tell me to visualize an apple, a red apple, I really cannot conjure it up in my mind. It's kind of gray and has a sort of apple shape. Other people are very much able to take that apple, spin it around in 3D, see the shiny part, zoom in, zoom out, make it disappear, come back, conjure up different objects. There's quite a range of ability to visualize in that. And the difficult part is that people who can do it don't understand the people who can't, and vice versa. It's like I can't imagine being able to picture something with great clarity just by conjuring it up in my mind. So the question after all that is, do you know, is there a kind of a prerequisite for some of these remote viewers to be able to visualize at a level that is very acute, very, polished, advanced? Do you know, has there been any research at all on that? Do some remote viewers have difficulty picturing things, but they can come up with words or other descriptive things? What's your opinion on that idea?
That's a very good question. It depends on, again, the individual. There are some people that are going to be better, as you just mentioned, at visualizing than others. But there's a strange thing about the mind, and that is that sometimes you can get a download, that's what I like to call it, and it's as clear as a bell to you. Whereas if you were put into an exercise where you said, I want you to visualize an apple, and you go, gee, I don't know that I can do that. There's a phenomena with the mind that I've observed through the years, and that is there will be things that will be seen and understood with such clarity that when people see it, they see it. They can't explain it. It's just like with Eric seeing his son in real time in his plane, coming in, having engine trouble, and then all of a sudden the movie stops. So it's not unlike turning on your television and you're watching a movie and you're seeing everything very clearly on your television. You don't have a problem with that. You don't have a problem seeing those images, looking at them and understanding what's going on in front of you. So the brain is a computer, and the downloads that you can get with the brain are so fascinating because they enable you to do many times things that you wouldn't think you could do.
So it's
Now,
kind of bypassing that natural ability, possibly. I know one other thing that, thinking of myself again, because it's really the only example I can come up with certainty, is that there's that state right kind of between right before sleep, the hypnagogic state, where I personally can get great clarity. It's fleeting though. It's right in between, when I lie down, start to get sleepy and fall asleep. It's very clear. It's three-dimensional. I can move things around, very bright and colorful. But again, it's very fleeting. It escapes me. As soon as you focus on it, you'll lose it. It's that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if what you're saying is that these downloads, so to speak, are kind of bypassing our natural way of processing thoughts or imagery. And which brings, that's a very fascinating point, is that there may be something that's being accessed by these very accomplished remote viewers.
Yes, and there were trainings they went through. Now, that's very important to understand. So often people don't realize that individually they may have talents that are stronger in one arena than in another. So those that went through the trainings, and I cannot address the exact exercises or what they did, but I can recall many years ago when I was just starting in this work, I was visiting with a friend, and I had been told by other psychics, because this was a brand new arena for me, I knew nothing about it. You can't do readings on someone that's not with you. You cannot do readings or get information about anybody or anything if you are not with them. I found that to be a total untruth. And the reason is, and I learned this very quickly, is because I was staying with some friends, and one of the people I was talking with said, Donna, my daughter has a question for you. The daughter comes in and is talking with me. She said, I just got a call from a friend in New York City, and my friend is going through surgery. Can you tell me how this is going to go for her? So what happened is, it was very quickly. I said, your friend having the back surgery, this isn't necessarily a good idea. She needs to get another opinion, because with the surgery that is planned, there's going to be a problem, and she's going to have pain, and she's going to have that for a long, long time. And what ended up happening, and I just gave the information. That is what I call a download. No judgment about it, just gave it as I got it. And it was a few weeks later that the daughter, again, I was visiting my friend, her daughter comes in and says, Donna, I want you to know my friend ended up having the surgery. She's been in constant pain ever since the surgery. The pain was not alleviated. It was made even more difficult for her. And she said she didn't get a second opinion. So I thought, now that's interesting. How is it I got that information when, according to some people, that's not possible? Again, it is that transmission of information. And there is an exercise often that I will do in public, demonstrating how this works. In fact, I just did it this past weekend at an expo where I was appearing and was a keynote speaker. And what I did, I had my assistant pass out tickets. We have those tickets, you can get them at the dollar store. There's 2 tickets that have the same number. So my assistant, and I wasn't bothering with the tickets. I had no idea what the numbers were or anything like that. I said, give one of those tickets to people in the audience. Each person in the audience got a ticket. And then you are to keep all of the copies of that ticket, and they'll go into an envelope. And then what I want you to do is have someone in the audience, and we had a nice group of people, good sized crowd. And I said, go into the audience. And then what I want you to do is have someone in the audience pull a ticket and give me the last 3 numbers on that ticket. And then I'll give information. And I do this because it shows that the mind is not limited. Now, this is a form of remote viewing, if you will. I don't know who the ticket is, who has it, number one. I have not handled the ticket, so you can't use psychometry. It's been in a plastic envelope, a baggie for all intents and purposes. And then all I'm given is a number. And I don't know who that is associated with. So I give out information first. That's what I do. And then we'll have interaction afterwards. And it's really fascinating to people how I will get information about a person, what they're doing, what's going on, things that I'm looking at that they can take advantage of. And it comes very quickly. It comes very quickly. And it is a way of focusing the mind so that you don't put your opinions in. And it's a discipline of being able to get information that is just as fascinating to me as it is to anybody that witnesses it. And it is just a demonstration how the mind is not limited. We're really quite amazing, we human beings. We have no idea of our capabilities.
That's my sense as well. So one of the things I've heard, and you can kind of dissuade me of this idea if I need to be dissuaded, is remote viewing a psychic ability? Is that the same kind of deal, or are they different skill
Well,
sets?
they're all part of the same family, Dan.
Okay.
It's all part of the same family. As human beings, for the purpose of communication, we like to put labels on things. We'll say, this is, a extra large egg, or we'll say this is a pigeon's egg. We have to have, and I use the egg as a description because eggs come in all sizes. So you have an ostrich egg where you can make 12 omelets with that ostrich egg. It's so big. You have a turkey egg, you have a chicken egg, but you have to have something that people can identify as far as a label goes. And an egg is an egg, but there's differences.
Mhm.
So what we've got here is that what we define as psychic ability has so many different aspects to it. It's absolutely amazing to me how it has such a diversity of expression.
You
And
I was going to ask a question here. You used a term that some of our listeners might not be familiar with. Use the term psychometry.
mhm,
And that's,
psychometry, yeah,
yeah,
it's
tell the
using.
audience what that is.
Okay, psychometry is when you have an item that is given to you that you don't know anything about who has this item, who belongs to the item. And that item holds an energy. And so that energy, then you read that energy. There is, for a lack of another term, you get the imprint that is on that item that has been held by the person. It doesn't make any difference what it is. And I had one of the most interesting experiences with a class that I did a number of years ago. And the class decided to assemble in one of the students' homes. And we were all sitting in a circle. And the lady who had invited us to our home for the class, and she had a lovely place and was plenty of room for, there was about 20 of us. And she brings out an item. She said, I have something I would like for you, all of you, to tell me what you see. What do you get? Well, it was a little urn, and nothing fancy, not anything ornate. So every one of us in the group, and I started with my students on the left, and we went all around the circle, including myself, and we had no idea what this was. It was totally nondescript. Every single student picked up information, and she very carefully was documented everything that was said. To our amazement, afterwards, and when we had just about finished with the class, she said, "May I share what I have observed?" And I said, "Certainly." She said, "None of you in this room know that I was in Africa for a number of years." She at the time had been married to an archaeologist. And she said, while we were there were some artifacts that were discovered. And she said, this is one of the artifacts that we brought back to the United States after we had finished this archaeological expedition. And she then went on to say how every single person in that circle had picked up information. And after she went through everything that was said, she then made the comment, "This is an urn of a child that was cremated, and it was a baby that died. They know that because of the size of the urn, and they had done an analysis of it to as best as they could. They said this was a very, very young child. We assume that it was a baby that died before it was, very old." And what they had discovered in their archaeology is that this was an area where the women would take their ashes of their children and they would put them in this place because all of these urns were very small, relatively speaking. And she said, we learned that this was a burial site. This was a place where they could come and they could visit their children that had passed. And it was a very, very sacred site for them. And all of us in the group, every single one of us, had, interestingly enough, picked up a different image just by holding that small item. We picked up a different image about what this was related to. What came out was a description of women carrying something, and there was this area that was very sacred. So all of these different points were brought forward, and it was amazing. She said, I am absolutely stunned by all of the different things. So when people pick up images off of an item, sometimes people will relate to what you call a frequency of energy. It might be very, very hot in their hands, or it might be very cool, but they start picking up information. They are literally reading the imprint that's made on the item. And that is what psychometry is. So a number of the people in the class didn't think they could pick up anything. And it was just thoughts that would come into the head, images that would come into the head. So that's what psychometry is.
Did someone have to teach you to be a remote viewer?
No, I don't think you really have to teach anyone. I think that what we have is this innate ability. Your Aboriginal people, for example, in Australia, they would keep track of each other. Now, they often used, when they first started publishing, The Mutant from Down Under was a book that was written by a woman that related to the Aboriginal peoples in Australia. But this was something in some respects that was taught, but it also was very, very natural. And when you talk about teaching about this, we have this naturally within ourselves. Women especially have this, we like to call it intuition. In other cultures, it's called different things. Different words are applied to it. But this is something where we know, or like Eric, who saw the movie about his son mentally, saw that and saw what was happening, and then all of a sudden the movie clicked. Well, what may have been going on at the time is that his son was having just as vivid a concern. Gee, maybe I'm not going to see my dad again. Maybe I won't make this flight. And, all of these thoughts, our thoughts go, they're so fast that often we don't pay attention to them. So there was this communication that was going on between the two of them. It was a form of remote viewing at the same time that telepathy was involved. And that is when the unseen is seen.
So I've got a question here, Dan. Well, for Donna, but let's consider this. Sometimes intuition is wrong. I mean, I'm sure sometimes there are remote viewers who have just, big misses. It's like, wow, where did that come from? I really I whiffed at the ball on that one, First of all, do you see that happen, and at what sort of regularity? I would think it depends on the experience, of course, but sometimes we just plain miss. Intuition is wrong. What do you think is happening in those cases where we do miss, we do receive the wrong thing, or we make the wrong conclusion about the information we're receiving? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Our brains are going 10,000 miles an hour at any given time of the day. So if someone is really strongly analytical, then that analytical side comes in and goes and pushes the intuitive side out. I know that's happened to me. And there's other times that we will absolutely not pay attention. And sometimes the intuitive factor is very subtle, and it'll go against what we perceive as the logical way to do something. And you will hear from veterans that have fought in wars. You will hear from medical professionals that they don't know why, but they have to check on something, or they just can't shake a feeling, something's going on, but it's not logical at all. It's not logical at all. So we have this part of ourselves that will be in constant conflict. And I remember being told by a particular religious group that I had the opportunity to visit, and this was many years ago, and they had a belief system that was being forced upon them, as far as I was concerned, saying that people could not do what I did. They said, oh, no. There were only certain people that could ever do that. And my perception was everybody's got it. This doesn't belong. This is not an exclusive club. Thank you very much. But it's what we want to give attention to sometimes as well. And let's just face it, we're human beings. So part of the process is learning to discern that intuitive nudge. Sometimes it's a very subtle one. It's a very subtle one. You know the old cartoon image where you have the devil sitting on one shoulder, you got the angel on the other shoulder? Mm-hmm. That's sort of a fun way of looking at it. But that is the conflict that goes on in the brain many times. And lots of times we just ignore it. But I will say something else too. I've had experiences where I've been given information about certain circumstances, and I'll share that with an individual, and I will always say, this is information only. You are welcome to change whatever you feel like you can change. And I've known people that have done that. They will say, you've given me this information. I don't think I want to go that route. I think I want to go another route. They're more than welcome to do so, because that's what is free will. That's free choice. But I think it's a wonderful tool. I've been in this work for so many years. I'm just as fascinated by it as other people are, even after all these years of working with it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And like all of this psi phenomenon, I think this can be put into that category. Dan said what's psychic, versus remote viewing and whatever, but it's all psi, Mm-hmm. You get into the area of, yes, we can get a download, we can receive, but can we also project? Can we also affect the outcome of that which we're viewing? Of course, that makes it infinitely more complex and more interesting to talk about. But what is your thought about whether the remote viewer is independent of the viewed subject or thought or whatever? I mean, is there a way where the remote viewer is actually affecting the object or the person or the scenario he or she is viewing? What do you think about that? The two-way communication, creation, possibly.
For those that are doing the exercise, like the CIA wanted, it was not the purpose of trying to affect anything. It was getting information that was current and present. And Russell Targ, with the people that he worked with, and I'm not recalling right now the name of the police officer that was considered their finest and their best reward. He was incredible. I think his first name was Pat, and he passed away a number of years ago. But as a police officer, he used it all the time to find criminals, to do this. And he wasn't the only police officer that I was made aware of that would do it. Many times, when you're in a line of work, there is that process that you feel you need to do. And if you're a police officer, there again, the deep underlying purpose is to protect, to serve and to protect. That is very, very important. So Pat, when he got into the remote viewing environment, they put him into, what is it, the feral cage, so he couldn't have any outside influences. And they would say, we want you, and they had a subject that was outside. And they were in a totally isolated situation. And they would say, you're to follow XYZ person and tell us where he is, describe what it is. And fortunately, he was a very good artist too. And he would draw what he saw, and it was right there. And that was his job. He was to follow this person, to draw the information, to give what he got without adding anything to it, without taking anything away. And it was very, very explicit. Mr. Swan, who also was well recognized for his skills, did the same thing. He could do the same thing. Now, you ask another question, which I think is a very interesting question, and that is, can we influence that which we see in another place? To a degree of a person's mental discipline, the answer could be yes. Again, it's a skill. It is a skill. So just like Eric that I mentioned at the beginning, who was seeing all of the activity that was going on with his son up in the wild blue. Now, Bud wasn't thinking about sending a message to his son saying, this is what you do, or I know you're scared, don't be scared. He wasn't doing any of that. He was just watching the movie. Now, if he had had a mindset where when he got something like that, he then would, if you will, send a communication to that individual because of being able to see what was going on. Now, again, Eric was not a pilot. He wouldn't have been able to look at the dashboard on the plane and tell him, watch this, watch that, lower your flaps, whatever would be the language for what needed to be done. He didn't have that. So his son got that from the control tower. But again, there are times, and I've known people to do this, where they will say they get the information, and this is common in many, many shamanic cultures throughout the world, and the information will be shared. They will be able to communicate with that person to help them if they're having a challenge, let them know what needs to be done. And this is something the kahunas of Hawaii the old kahunas were very skilled with. They could direct energy, they could direct all kinds of things in a very unique way. Tibetan lamas would also say the same thing. So it depends on the culture, it depends on your training, it depends on your interest, it depends on your natural acumen. You know, what is it that fascinates you? And it can be used in some respects in a negative way. It can be used that way.
Yeah, it brings up the subject of voodoo or curses or hexes, you know. Of course, I'm always thinking of the big picture. Those are my questions. The big picture questions: how malleable is this realm? You know, can you cast a spell? It brings into the fold, you know, witches and priests and mental masters of all kinds. That logically leads me to the next question, which is that are there unwritten rules that guide us in this realm? I mean, are there certain things that are really forbidden? If you imagine the universe as a place that was programmed by the creator, did he or she or it put certain rules in place that said you will not blah blah blah? It's like any computer program, you have certain criteria, right? So I'm wondering, are there any hard and fast rules that you know of from your experience that apply to this realm where human minds are kind of probing and messing around?
Mhm. Well, the reality is that if you're not willing to understand your own limitations, and or if you're wanting to go past those limitations, you're responsible for everything that you do. And that is huge. And in this work, in my particular experience, is you have to have integrity, you have to have clarity, and you have your boundaries about what you will do and what you will not do. And there is, believe it or not, there can be a pretty huge penalty. That's why in so many fairy tales and in so many legends, you have the white witch, like in the Wizard of Oz, and you have the black witch. Okay? People have used fear to keep individuals from understanding, really, that is what this is all about. It's the yin, the yang, the positive, the negative, whatever your terminology is. So can you use this for something, downright bad? Absolutely. I mean, look at electricity. Are you going to give up electricity? We wouldn't be able to do what we're doing if we didn't have electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It can kill you. If you don't know how to handle it, it can kill you. Fortunately, we finally learned the laws that affect electricity, but we still can burn. Houses can burn. We can, again, die from exposure to it. If lightning hits you, you may or may not survive. It's an energy. And this energy, it is necessary to handle this energy responsibly. And people will say, well, that's such a silly example. No, it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful demonstration of energy. And we're talking about mental energy. That's why in today's world, the mind, body, spirit, and emotional aspect is so significant, because it is part of the total package of every single form of life that we have on this planet. All those four components. And this is something, when people are in a particular mental state that is not a healthy mental state, it's awful. And I just did an interview. I'm trying to remember the Unabomber. I had a conversation with a researcher, and the Unabomber, I went and I was, I did an interview on this many years ago with my program, and it was fascinating. But in that interview, I don't recall an in-depth discussion regarding much of his background. And he was someone that was a genius, the guy that was the Unabomber. However, he was engaged in a study when he was 17 years old at Harvard. At Harvard University, there was a professor that was doing experiments with people's minds. And this guy, the professor, ended up really being in deep trouble afterwards because of what he did. But these students at Harvard didn't realize what he was going to try to do. He didn't explain to them, put them through all kinds of mental exercises. And it created quite a distortion in a very young man who already had a lot of, you might say, poor social skills, and ended up committing, horrendous crimes, killing people. So these are things that many times people do not want to pay attention to, but there's so much that goes on in the human psyche that we do not understand even today. The kahunas of Hawaii had a deep understanding of it. And of course, they went underground once the missionaries came over, because all of this was considered hoodoo voodoo. And it really is utilizing natural laws. And there was a Dr. Brigham for whom the Brigham Museum in Honolulu is named after. And he was made a kahuna because he was able to do some very, very special things. And he studied with the kahunas, and he told his protege, Max Freedom Long, he said, "This is all natural law. I don't understand yet what they're doing, but it is all natural law." And that's what we're still learning.
Interesting. So the law might be, I think your electricity analogy is great. I've never quite thought about it that way. I mean, everyone understands that electricity can be great, and it can be, our greatest enemy too, especially if you're in water. But we know those laws. Those are very familiar to us. But the idea of maybe karma in the mental energy or the subtle energy or whatever, the realm of subtle energy, thought energy, is much harder to grasp. Karma, if you send something bad out, it'll visit you threefold or whatever particular terms you believe or measurements. But I think that's a great analogy. The electricity, everyone can understand that. It's similar to the thought realm too. I think that's exactly right. So anyway, Dan, I'm sure you got questions going. I'll stop monopolizing. You ask a few. Dan, maybe that's why he hasn't been asking, because he's been knocked off the internet. Dan, he's not there. Okay. Well, that means I get to keep asking questions, but we'll wait and see if he comes back. You mentioned, I think, what was the Faraday cage,
Yes,
right?
but yes, Faraday cage.
Yes, Faraday, right?
Faraday cage.
I can't remember the background of the person that is named after, but anyway, so that theoretically will block it shields something. What is that shielding then? Electromagnetic radiation in general, but also how would that affect the thought realm that we're talking about here?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
You can be in any place, anywhere, quiet, noisy, it doesn't make any difference. For a while, when I was still in California, I appeared at a little restaurant called the Ginger House in Tarzana. And I would do little mini sessions for the public. And this gentleman sits down next to me and he said, "Okay, so do a reading for me." I said, "All right." And I started telling him about what I was experiencing and what I was seeing. And what I saw was a very involved complex, and it was fascinating to me. And I started giving him some details. And he looked at me very quietly. He said, "Do you realize you're violating national security?" I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yes." I said, "That's okay. Let me finish telling you what I'm seeing." And he looked at me really with a very interest. He was not wearing a uniform, but it had a relationship to the military. It had a relationship to particular weapons. It had a relationship to a certain environment. Now, I had not been asked to even look at this. This is what I got in a download. Why? I don't know. I do. It's just what happens. So it fascinates anyone when you really think about it, that there are no barriers. There really are not any barriers, excepting what we put into place. And someone once asked, "Don't you get really goofy, or you must get all these thoughts all the time?" I said, "No, it's only when I choose to focus. I don't walk around knowing what everybody's thinking. You'd end up in Western State Hospital, for heaven's sakes, in the loony bin." It's something you learn to turn off, and you can learn to turn on. And for me, that was something that was very natural. But it is a reality. It's there.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here, and I know we want to respect your time. I know you've got other interviews and shows and all sorts of things that you're doing. We definitely want to honor that time and also express uh, our gratitude for coming to visit us for a second time. I hope to see you again on yet a third time. Third time's the charm, right? But also, I'd like to say I really am impressed by your energy and your ability to be so enthusiastic about these topics. They are fascinating, but after a while, they kind of really fill up, at least for me, fill up my brain to the point where I just kind of want to relax and not think about them because they're very, mind expanding. That's the whole point.
Yes.
So I'm impressed that you're able to keep this up. And speaking of that, we want our listeners to be able to visit your website and contact you if appropriate. I'll put the information I have on the YouTube link, but do you have something that you want to share, either a book or website or other contact?
Oh, yes, yes. One, I do 6 radio shows a week. And I have my daily show from 8 to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday, and that's the Donna Seebo show. Then we have a double header on Wednesdays, and I have Warriors for Peace. And the formats on each show are very different. I do focus on authors. So I have authors from all over the world that I interview, and it's just wonderful. So that information is on the Donna Seebo Show Network page. And when people Google my name, and my last name is spelled S like Sam, 2 E's like Edward, B like boy, O, Seebo, then they're going to find all kinds of links that they can go to. And the shows are always recorded so people can go in and listen to them whenever they want. And then I have my children's books, and let me pull here.
Mhm.
The holidays are coming up. And the one for Christmas, it's the only one that I've put out so far that's related to the holidays. It's God's Kiss.
Mm,
And the art in it is just absolutely amazing. And it's for
yeah.
kids anywhere from 4, on up.
Okay.
Love it because it's got so many critters in it, so many different
Yeah.
animals and children. And then there's the Magic Hat. And the Magic Hat is a story about healing and the power of imagination, love, and miracles. And you
Mm,
go into my website, delphiinternational.com, and you'll find where you can go and listen even to excerpts. And then my most recent one is the woodcutter and the tree.
mm.
And that is about the environment, about a tree that talks to a woodcutter. It's set in medieval time frame. So each and every book
Wow.
is very, very useful. Young people really enjoy them. I've done before COVID hit, I was doing storytelling and that type of thing, and more than one environment. And the kids just really are great. I really enjoyed it. So there's that. And then there's information on, doing private appearances, working with groups, speaking, all of that. They just go into my website. Actually, I have the two, delphiinternational.com and Mrs. Seebo's classics.com. But just Google my name and all of those links will pop up too.
Okay, and like I said, we'll put those vital links in our YouTube description also, so people will not be able to miss it. Not that they would want to miss it, but we'll send them your way. And I just want to say about the books, I think it maybe it's a sweeping generalization to say that kids don't have imagination anymore. I think that's what every generation probably says about the kids,
That is true,
but
but they do. They
they do
do.
have imagination. But I think starting early, letting them know that they have these natural powers. We're so
Mhm.
fascinated by superheroes in movies, and we focus our attention outward, like, oh, I wish I was like Superman, Superwoman, whoever, one of the 1,000 different ones we have these days. But if we can turn them inside and look at their own superpowers and just keep reminding them as they grow older and get more into this mindset of logic rules the day, you can, if you can hang on to the intuition, the innate abilities that you're talking about here in kids, I think they will grow up to be more complete people too.
Mhm.
But it's tough
True.
in these days, because it's very easy to, as a father of 2 teenagers, I know that they're so connected to their devices that sometimes you leave your own brain, you go into somebody else's, you know, and live there.
Mm-hmm. That's all right. You'll survive it, and so will they.
Yeah. Well, they turned out great. And I think that what you're doing is just reminding us that we're all superheroes in our own minds, and we need to turn and focus on that. If we feel like we've lost it, you know, we need to re-find that ability.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of losing people, I think we've lost Dan. I've got a note from him that his internet is not working. So he's gone. So Dan says, say goodbye to Donna for me. So Dan says, thank you again, and we'll talk to you again. And I'm going to let you go also and say thank you for your second visit. Hope to see you in the future on a third visit. So thank you,
I
Donna.
look forward to that. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
You're
Have a
welcome.
wonderful holiday season too.
Yes, you too. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.